This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi Glatstein, even though they say Agan Shiur Purim is, the whole year, and when you make Havdalah every Motzei Shabbos, say La Yehudim Hoysa'ir B'Simcha V'Sasam V'Kar, but already we're in the embrace of Purim, already Shloshim Yom Koydem Achag. So what better time than to begin delving into Inyane Purim, Inyane Megillas Esther? Well, the Gemara tells us on Daf Zayin, the Gemara brings many opinions, but they all say the same idea from different sources. But Rameir says, Rameir Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Nemra. Megillas Esther was said with the divine spirit, was said Baruch HaKodesh, and that makes a nafkamina lahalacha. How is that? Number one, if it's said Baruch HaKodesh, so then it could be entered into the Tanakh. If it's said Baruch HaKodesh, then it's Metames HaYadayim. It's a very interesting halacha about Kisvei HaKodesh. The halacha is Kisvei HaKodesh is Metames HaYadayim. Any of the Svarim of Tanakh is Metames HaYadayim. So for instance, if somebody were to touch Kisvei HaKodesh, it would render their hands tamei. And then that could be Metame Truma. It's very interesting halacha. You would think Kisvei HaKodesh is something which is holy. The Chachamim say Kisvei HaKodesh is tamei. The reason they said that is because people, what they used to do was, they figured if Truma is Kadosh, and scriptures and Kisvei HaKodesh is Kadosh, they used to store the Truma with the Kisvei HaKodesh. And what happened was, the mice would come along, they had mice there too, and the mice would eat the Truma, and while they eat the Truma, the mice would eat the Kisvei HaKodesh as well. So in order to prevent the mice from getting near the Kisvei HaKodesh, they forced people to separate their Kisvei HaKodesh from their food, and they said, Kisvei HaKodesh is Metameis HaYadayim. Okay? So Rameir says, Esther was said, Beruach HaKodesh, Shenemar, Vayivada Hadavar LeMordechai. And the matter became known to Mordechai. In other words, this is in reference to the episode of Big Son and Seresh, that Mordechai discovered the plot that Big Son and Seresh wanted to assassinate the king. So the question Rameir has is, how in the world did Mordechai know about the plot of Big Son and Seresh? You think they said, before we plan to assassinate the king, let's tell the Gadol Hadar about our plans? Obviously not. So how did Mordechai know about it? And the Gemara doesn't believe, Rameir doesn't believe that Mordechai knew their language and he overheard them speaking. Simply put, how did Mordechai know? The answer is, he must have had Ruach HaKodesh, divine spirit. Says Rameir, from here we see that Esther was written Baruch HaKodesh. Otherwise, how would it be possible for Mordechai to have known about the plot of Big Son and Seresh? So immediately, the Shagas Aryeh, who wrote a sefer on Masechta Megillah called Turei Even, he asked, what kind of proof is that Esther was said Baruch HaKodesh? All that proves is that Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh. But that doesn't prove that it was written in the book. All it proves is whoever wrote the story in Megillas Esther is writing that Mordechai must have had Ruach HaKodesh. But in no way does it prove that Mordechai wrote the book, Ruach HaKodesh. Elamai, says the Shagas Aryeh, maybe you'll say, but who wrote Megillas Esther? It says, Vatichtov Esther Hamalka, O Mordechai HaYehudi, it's called Toikef. They were the ones who wrote the book. So if Mordechai wrote the book and he had Ruach HaKodesh, and we know that Esther had Ruach HaKodesh, like the pasuk says, Vatilbash Esther Malchus Melamed Shalavsha Ruach HaKodesh. So if Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh and Esther had Ruach HaKodesh, and they wrote the book, they obviously wrote it Baruch HaKodesh. Says the Shagas Aryeh, why does that follow? Everything they wrote when they filled out their tax return, they filled it out Baruch HaKodesh. When they had to get their kids buses, they filled out the application Baruch HaKodesh. I mean, there are things you do, even if a person, just because Esther had Ruach HaKodesh and Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh, how in any way does that prove that they wrote Megillas Esther Baruch HaKodesh? Hago ba'atzmacha, says the Shagas Aryeh. Think about the following. The Gemara discusses whether Koheles was written Baruch HaKodesh, and the Gemara brings various opinions. Rav Meir's personal opinion is Koheles was not written Baruch HaKodesh. Even though Rav Meir holds, and really everybody holds, that Mishlei was written Baruch HaKodesh. So now if Mishlei was written Baruch HaKodesh, who wrote Mishlei? Shlomo HaMelech. And that means Shlomo HaMelech, if Mishlei is written Baruch HaKodesh, that means Shlomo HaMelech had Baruch HaKodesh. And yet, Rameir holds Koheles was not written Baruch HaKodesh. So we see, just because an author has Baruch HaKodesh, not every single book they write was written Baruch HaKodesh. So what's the proof that Megillas Esther was written Baruch HaKodesh? Just because Vayivada Hadavar LaMordechai, who cares Vayivada Hadavar LaMordechai? Good, Mordechai had Baruch HaKodesh, but who says he wrote the book Baruch HaKodesh? That's the kasha of the Shagas Aryeh. Okay, Rabbi Sai, tonight we're going to be featuring one primary author, one Gadol Yisrael, but from many of the different Sfarim that he wrote, we're going to be focusing on the Ben Ish Chai. Chacham Yosef Chaim Bavel. He was born in 1832, passed away in 1909. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Bavel was one of the great all-time luminaries. In fact, on Shas, his commentary on the Agadata, the Gemara, the Ben Yehoyada, is like from the classic Mefarshim on Agadata. Aside from the Marsha and the Ein Yaakov, Ben Yehoyada. Now, interestingly, Ben Yehoyada, as a young boy, the Ben Ish Chai, he fell into a bar, he fell into a pit. And he was near drowning. In fact, members of his family had given up hope from rescuing him, from saving him, and they pulled him out and they yanked him out, and somehow they revived him. Some say they revived him mamish Tchias HaMesim, and from that point on, he dedicated his life to Torah v'Avodas Hashem. In fact, the Mekubalim said that he was saved from this pit. He had the neshama of Yosef HaTzadik. Interestingly, there are many things that he's famous for. For example, if you go to Meron, the cover of the Rashbi, there's one of the famous Nagunim that are associated with Shema Yechai. Va'amartem koi lachai Rabbi Shimon Yechai was written by the Ben Ish Chai. Well, in 1869, Chacham Yosef Chaim, he visits Eretz Yisrael, and he goes to the kever of Benayahu ben Yehoyada, one of the generals of David's army. And he felt a certain elevation in his neshama, and he recognized that somehow he has the same Sharash HaNeshama as Benayahu ben Yehoyada, and therefore he named all of his Sfarim after the pasuk in Tanakh that says, Uvnayahu ben Yehoyada, Ben Ish Chai, Rav Pa'alim, Mekav Tze'el, and all of these words are names of various Sfarim of Ben Yehoyada. Ben Yehoyada, Ben Ish Chai, Mekav Tze'el, Rav Pa'alim are Shal Tzuvos. Interesting, Ben Ish Chai published more than 40 Sfarim, and 80 of his Sfarim remain in manuscript form. So he was a prolific writer. At the end of his life, he went to visit the kever of Yecheskel Hanavi. He spent a week there until Matzai Shabbos. Matzai Shabbos he didn't feel well. Monday already he passed away to the Olam HaEmes. Ben Yehoyada. So Ben Yehoyada comes and he wants to answer the kasha of the Shagas Aryeh. In other words, the kasha is, just because Mordechai clearly had Ruach HaKodesh, otherwise how is he privy to the plot of Bigsan and Seresh? Who says he wrote the book Ruach HaKodesh? Says the Ben Yehoyada as follows. If Mordechai did not write Megillas Esther Baruch HaKodesh, I've got a problem with the way he wrote it. How could he write Vayivada Hadavar LaMordechai? That Mordechai knew about the plot, which clearly indicates that the only way he could have known about it is Baruch HaKodesh. If he's writing this book as a discretionary writing, then how dare he have the audacity and the boldness to include such accolades about himself? That Vayivada Hadavar LaMordechai, that Mordechai knew about this plot, obviously Baruch HaKodesh. A tzaddik would never have described himself in such glowing terms. Mordechai, we know, is like Moshe Rabbeinu, was an anav like Moshe Rabbeinu. Why would he write in a book that he must have known Baruch HaKodesh, right? Another, like anybody wants to say, how do I know if Makubal is fake? If the Makubal tells you he has Baruch HaKodesh, he's fake. Also if he takes money. That's not mine, that's Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, the leading Makubal today. No Makubal is going to tell you as Ruach HaKodesh, certainly not a member of the Anshe Knesset Agdola, certainly not Mordechai HaTzadik. Not Mordechai HaTzadik. So why would Mordechai write in the Megillah, Vayivada Hadavar LaMordechai? You know why? Because this is not his own book. It must be the Rebbeinu Shalom is divinely guiding and instructing him, write this, write that, don't write that. In other words, his arm was being twisted. The same way when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the words, V'Ish Moshe Anav Ma'od, you think Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to write that pasuk? What could he do? Hashem says, Zet Torah Moshe. This is the way the Torah is. You can't be Moshe, you can't be Megareya. What can Moshe do? He has to write in the Torah. V'Ish Moshe. The fact that Mordechai included in the Megillah this great accolade indicates that the Rebbeinu Shem obviously was divinely guiding him to write the words Vayivada Hadavar LeMordechai, says Ben Yehoyada, to answer the Kasha of the Shagasari. So with this introduction, we understand now that every word of the Megillah was not Mordechai and Esther saying, this really fits into the trop, this really fits the tune. Every word obviously is written b'derech neis, as an expression and to magnify the miracle. Okay, so that's an important hakdama. That every word, every detail, every seemingly innocuous mention is to magnify the miracle of Purim. Okay, let's just give one more introductory remark. And that is, we have to have some good gematria before we begin. And that is the Ben Ish Chai wrote many svarim of Drush. He wrote on Chumash Hadaras Eliyahu. He wrote a sefer Oid Yosef Chai. He wrote very interesting svarim. He wrote svarim for women. He also wrote a sefer on Megillas Esther called Keren Yeshua, which I do not think is available, but my friend in Virginia, Gedalia Schwartz, already had an inkling that I needed that sefer, so he already sent. It's ready on the way. Okay, but right now I have it in this very nice volume, Ben Ish Chai on Megillas Esther. You have a nice picture of him. He looks very nice. It's now in this sefer he quotes all the svarim of the Ben Ish Chai on Megillas Esther, including the sefer Keren Yeshua. Now some of the pieces that he mentions from the Keren Yeshua I was not able to find in the original, and some of the pieces in the original I could not find in this edition. I think there are two different editions of Keren Yeshua. So what you have on the sheets are two different editions of the Keren Yeshua on Megillas Esther. So let's just start with two gematrias and then get a little bit involved in the intrigue and the political dynamics of the story. First of all, one of the well-known psukim, Vayhi oimein es Hadassah. Vayhi oimein es Hadassah. He raised Hadassah, which is Esther. By the way, it's the only time she's called Hadassah in the whole Megillah, right? Well, we mentioned this elsewhere. How many times is Haman's name mentioned in the Megillah? 54. How many times Memuchan? 1. How many times Esther? 54. How many times Hadassah? 1. Haman versus Esther. Exactly parallel. 54, 1 and 1. Okay. But, says the Ben Ish Chai, the word oimein is also like the word amen, which could stand for Kel, Melech, Naaman, which is a remez to the tremendous hashgacha pratis that the Rebbeinu Shalom is giving to Esther Hamalka. And of course we know the word Amen, Aleph Mem Nun, Gematria 91, equals the two names of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Right? Aleph Daled Nun Yud. That's why, the Arizal says, it's quoted by the Rishis Chachma, answering Amen is better than making the bracha, because when you make a bracha, only one mention of Hashem. There's only Baruch Atah Hashem. When you say Amen, you get both Shemais. You get Yud Kei Vav Kei and Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Also, the Ben Ish Chai writes, so that's Esther. Esther has this divine providence. She has Oimein. She has the two names of Hashem hovering over her. And then you have Mordechai HaYehudi. Mordechai HaYehudi, numerical value, Shakai, 314. Also, he's being divinely protected. So bear that in mind throughout the whole story. Okay, let's get into some of the details. Now, if I would ask most people, and don't think too much, just answer the question, what's the turning point in the Megillah? There's even a special trop, right? There's a whole thing that there's a whole special way to do that. That's considered, in fact, al pi halacha, you need to raise, when you get up to that part, you're supposed to do it louder. That's like the turning point of the Megillah. Achashverosh is tossing and turning, he can't sleep at night, and he has the Sefer HaZichronos read, and he remembers he never rewarded Mordechai, and just then Haman walks in, and Haman's thinking in his heart, Achashverosh must want to honor him, so Achashverosh says, what would you do to a guy who the king wants to honor? And Haman said, put on the royal clothing and let him ride the royal horse, and put him on the crown. You go ahead and you put it on Mordechai and you lead him through the streets, right? And we're all happy. It's such a nice part of the story. That's the turning point, right? Well, if you actually think about it for a moment, like a half a second, then you would realize that this has absolutely nothing to do with the story. It contributed zero to the salvation of the Jewish people. Very nice. One day Haman had a bad day, and one day Mordechai had a good day. You know, the moment that Mordechai got off that horse, what does the pasuk say? Look at number 10. Vayoshav Mordechai el Shar HaMelech. He went back to the gate, he put on his sackcloth, and he went back to cry again. You know why? Because there was a looming gezerah of the annihilation of the Jewish people. So the fact that he had one nice day marching through the streets of Shushan, wearing royal clothing, that did absolutely nothing for us. What did that got to do with anything? Doesn't have anything to do with the price of tea in China. Very nice. Mordechai had a moment in the sun. Who cares? We were all dead. He went back. He went back to Avelos. Sakva Ifer Yutzal Arabim. I mean, think about what happened. From the moment of the Gezerah, Mordechai was fasting, wearing sackcloth. They grabbed him on a day. They threw him on a horse. They put the crown, and then, as soon as that was over, he went back to crying. I mean, what's the story doing in the Megillah? All of a sudden, Ba'alai, Lahahu. It had nothing to do with anything. It didn't help us at all. So I know what you're thinking. The problem is you're too much into football. The momentum switched. Right? You ever hear, there's a momentum change in the game. Momentum. That's in NFL. But in real life, when there's a decree on a nation that they're going to be annihilated, the fact that one guy has a good day does not change the law. The momentum, the fumble, the momentum that we're looking for, that doesn't work in real life. So what exactly is so critical and important? Why is it even in the Megillah? This is a kasha of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, okay? Now, if you've been following the Shiurim a couple of years, you know that by us, there's no such thing as Purim without Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. And don't think that just because I'm mentioning him one time now, that's our fulfillment of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz before Purim. We have to have the Minhag Kadosh for many years. We have a Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz Shiur on Purim, a new one every year, not the one about, why Esther was, the one I said over there, right? Every year it's a new one. We have a new one in Mirz Hashem also. But this is the kasha of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. What exactly does this day in the limelight that Mordechai have to do with the miracle of Purim? Okay, let's move on. So Haman leads Mordechai through the streets, and he goes back to Zeresh, and he goes back to all of his friends, and sycophants, and all of his supporters, and he tells them about his bad day. And what is the pasuk there? Look at number 11. Oidam medabrim imay. He's speaking to them. Sorry, say hamelech higiyu vayafilu avias haman el hamishtash asa Esther. As he's telling Zeresh and all of his fans about his bad day, all of a sudden the king's officials come to pull Haman where? To the party with Esther. What's the big rush? Why? They came running in just as Haman is telling his fans about his bad day. Vayavhilu lahavias Haman. They with great bahala, with great confusion, they schlep out Haman. Obviously, if the Megillah is telling us that they did it hastily and quickly with bahala, this is a critical part of the story. And again, Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz wants to know, and this kasha is quoted by the Ben Ish Chai in number 12. Why is it significant that after Haman tells Zeresh and his fans about his bad day leading Mordechai through the street, they schlep him out with bahala? Why is that important? Why is that mentioned? Keraboisai, your favorite halacha. Some people are makbid many times during the year on this, but really it's only on Purim. Chayev inish lebesume ad lo yada bein or Haman lebaruch Mordechai. Person needs to be inebriated to the level that they can't distinguish between Ar Haman and Baruch Mordechai. Come to Haman, nah! You don't have to drink so much. All you need to do is drink a little bit and then go to sleep. And when you're sleeping, you don't know the difference between Ar Haman and Baruch Mordechai. Well, that sounds like a cop-out. That sounds like if a rabbi gave a heter like that. I mean, come on. That's how you have to drink till you don't. No, you don't have to drink. Drink a tiny bit and then go to sleep. Do you know any halacha that any legitimate posek says a way out? You could fulfill it like this. That sounds cheap, right? You buy into that? What's Rambam talking about? You drink a little and then you go to sleep. I mean, if the point is to remember the yayin and to not recognize the difference between Ar Haman and Baruch Mordechai by drinking, then what's this cop-out of going to sleep? Ask the Ben Ish Chai in number 14. Okay, Rabbi say, to understand Megillas Esther, you really have to understand the timing and the comment of Charvona. Charvona only said one sentence in the whole Megillah. You know what Charvona says? Well, let's get the background. So, they go to the party, and Esther says, here's my she'ela, here's my bakasha, that kinem karnu ani va'ami lahashmid, laroig, uliaved. So we're being sold to be annihilated. So Achashverosh says, you're kidding me? I don't believe it. Now that itself is ridiculous. Why do you don't believe it? He's the one who told Haman, don't pay me to kill the Jews, do it for free. He says, Mihu Zevi Ezahu, right? Who is it? Who's the guy? So Esther says, Ish Tsar ve'oyev, Haman hara, it's Haman. And all of a sudden the buzz by Haman nivas. Haman is like, oh, startled. What is he startled? Was it like a surprise? Achashverosh knew Haman made the decree. Haman asked Achashverosh to buy the rights to kill the Jews, and Achashverosh said, keep the money. And all of a sudden Haman is startled. And how does the king react? He's so fuming angry, he gets out of his seat, and he takes a step outside to the Ginas Habisan, and he's like trying to cool off. He can't control his anger. And what happens? Haman approaches Esther, and starts getting down on his hands and knees and starts begging her, save my life, save my life. Just then the king walks in, and somehow Haman must have taken a misstep, and he trips, and it looks like he's trying to violate Esther in the king's palace in front of his eyes. So the king says, I can't believe it. Hagam lichboish es hamalka yimi babayis? A chutzpah in front of my face, you're violating the queen? Ufnei Haman chafu. Haman is ashamed. Comes Charvona. Vayomer Charvona. Echad min hasarisim. Gam hinei ha'etz. Interestingly, Charvona says one thing. He starts off his word with what? Gam. Gam. Says the Kikayin the Yonim Masechta Megillah. V'gam Charvona zachol atawai v'gam Charvona. In other words, the pasuk of v'gam that Charvona said should be zachol atawai. That's v'gam Charvona, because that's how he introduced his comments. V'gam gam hinei ha'etz. Listen to what Charvona says. King, I have a great idea. You see this tree that Haman made to hang Mordechai, who spoke good about you? It's standing in Haman's house, 50 amos tall. King said, what a great idea. Hang him! Story over. Wait a second. That's why Achashverosh wanted to kill Haman? It makes no sense. Here you have a guy, the queen is saying, this man wants to kill me and my whole people. That he can contain himself. He steps outside, he's trying to take a breather, that he can control himself. Then he sees this Haman guy trying to molest Esther in front of his face. He's cool. But the tree, that he made a tree to hang Mordechai. What does Achashverosh care that Haman wants to hang Mordechai? Haman wanted to kill all the Jews, and he was okay with that. And now he's reminded that Haman wants to kill Mordechai. Well, what would Achashverosh care? Because Mordechai did him a favor. By the way, Achashverosh forgot about that favor long ago. Remember when Mordechai did it the first time? They wrote it up in the book of Chronicles, and he completely forgot about it. Obviously, he could care less about Mordechai. So all of a sudden, he doesn't care. He doesn't care that this Haman guy wants to kill all the Jews. He doesn't care that Haman's about to attack Esther. What does he care about? That Haman made a tree 50 amos tall. And all of a sudden, that does it. Why is that? Doesn't make any sense. Also, let's be medactic. Charvona does not open up his mouth. When Esther says, right, Achashverosh says, who's the guy who wants to kill us? So Esther says, Haman! What does Charvona say? Nothing. He doesn't open up his mouth. What does the king do? He steps outside. He comes back in. He sees Haman about to jump on Esther. What does Charvona say? Nothing. But after Achashverosh says the words Hagam lichboish es hamalka imi babayis, only then Charvona opens up his mouth. Like, why is he timing his comment? Originally, when Esther said it's this guy, it's the Haman, Charvona says nothing. When Achashverosh says look, Hagam lichboish es hamalka, nothing. It's only all the way at the end when Haman is completely startled. Then Charvona plants his words. And look how effective they were. Let's take note of the following. When Mordechai overhears the plan to assassinate the king, Vayivadah hadavar leMordechai, Vayagel Esther Amaka, Vatomer Esther Amach b'Shem Mordechai, Vayivukash hadavar Yimasei, Vayitol Shem Leitz, Vayikasev b'Sefer Divrei Hayamim L'fnei Hamelch. So think about what happened. Mordechai saves the king's skin, and what's his reward? Come here, Mordechai. You see this book? You're on my good list. That's reward. Kind of ridiculous. I had a Rebbe in 5th grade that if you did something good, someone would write it on the good list. You did something bad, someone bad on the bad list. It didn't really encourage any good or... I mean, what is the big reward that Mordechai is written down in the Sefer HaZikaron? So the Ben Ish Chai says like this. Okay? Says the Ben Ish Chai, really, there's no reason to reward Mordechai. Imagine, do you get rewarded for stopping at a red light? Or, hey, you ever get pulled over? Hey, you're going under the speed limit. Here's $50. Or you paid your taxes. Here you have a $1,000 bonus. In this world, you don't get rewarded for what you have to do. And when you get rewarded, what's the message of a reward? The message of a reward is, you really went out of your way. It was really unbelievable what you did. The last thing Achashverosh wants to do is send out a message and have on the front cover of the paper, Mordechai tells the king that somebody poisoned his drink and he's rewarded. What kind of message are you sending? That really, if somebody wants to assassinate the king, nobody should say anything. And if you do, you're a great guy, you'll be rewarded. The last thing you want last message you want to send out is that it's considered going beyond the call of duty to save the king's skin. So Achashverosh, the last thing he wants to do is reward Mordechai. But he's a good guy. And he wants to show some appreciation to Mordechai. So he has it written down in the book. And the timing of when he remembers to reward Mordechai is the key to the whole story. And something I never realized before. Says the Ben Ish Chai, let's come back to some of the questions. Let's try to understand Charvona's well-timed comment. When Achashverosh said, who wants to kill you? Esther says, Haman. Haman doesn't say a word, neither does Charvona. The king steps out, he comes back in, he sees Haman advancing to Esther. Nothing. Charvona doesn't say anything. It's only after Achashverosh says, what are you doing? Then Charvona opens up his mouth. Says the Ben Ish Chai, first let's understand human nature a little bit. If somebody is angry and someone's upset, now, if your spouse or your friend or anybody you know gets angry at you, the best thing that could happen to you is if they say something to you. But if they keep it pent up inside, you don't know what's going to hit you when the time comes. But as soon as they say something, keep your mouth closed and be happy that that's all you got. That they vented their anger on those words. So when Achashverosh says, who's the guy? Who's the guy? Esther said, Haman. Achashverosh was so fuming. Charvona said, I don't have to tell him anything. He's going to knock Haman's a dead man. But then when he comes back, Charvona is assuming that Achashverosh is going to hang the guy. Why should I say anything? And we're going to see, especially because, for a certain reason. But then he sees that Haman is making advance to Esther, and Achashverosh opens up his mouth. Are you kidding me? In my palace? Now most kings would have been so angry, they never would have said anything. They just motioned to the executioner, off with him. But the fact that Achashverosh opened up his mouth and he said, Hagam, Lichbash, are you kidding me? You're doing this in the palace? Charvona got scared. I mean, that's all Haman's going to get? A nasty remark from Achashverosh. So he's now compelled in the 11th hour, in the final moment, to give this suggestion. Okay, that's just the beginning. Ben Ish Chai adds the following. This is Mamish Go'inus. This is in number 21. It says Ben Ish Chai. The Gemara says in Soita that when Haman could not take the fact that Mordechai wasn't bowing down to him, so the pasuk says, "Vatomer loy zaresh ishtoi v'chol oyhavav yasu it's gavaya chamishim ama make a tree 50 amos tall." Who are these oyhavav of Haman who gave Haman the idea to hang Mordechai? The Gemara says it's Charvona. So Charvona is not stupid. If he's going to tell the king, look what Haman did. He made a tree to hang Mordechai on. Haman's going to turn right back at Charvona and say, are you kidding me? This was your idea. And then what's Charvona going to say? No, not me. This is chazaka, the meyes b'fnei chaveroi. If you're accused of something, nobody would ever deny it. Right? It's chazaka. That's why if someone is moideh b'miktzah, someone admits to a partial loan or a partial chiyuv, you don't have a migu that you could have been koifer hakol, because nobody would be koifer hakol. Chazaka, the meyes b'fnei chaveroi. So Charvona is not dumb. He never in a million years would say to Achashverosh, you see the tree that Haman made to hang Mordechai? Because Haman will say, what are you kidding? It was your idea, the tree. You told me to make the tree. But Charvona is very smart. Because when Achashverosh, so that's why Charvona's lips are sealed. The last thing he wants to do is mention that tree. But then Achashverosh comes back in the palace and he says, Haman, Hagam lichmosh hamalka yimi babayis ufnei Haman chafu. The Rambam says on those words, ufnei Haman chafu, that the minhag in Persia was, when someone gets the king angry, chafu, they cover his face, so the king doesn't have to look at him. So all of a sudden, when Achashverosh said to Haman, you're doing this in front of my eyes? A guy came along with the big paper bag, and they put it over Haman's face, and his face is covered. Charvona says, I have a great idea, there's a tree. And from under the bag you hear Haman say, They're not paying attention to what Haman said. He's covered. Charvona only had the audacity to mention anything about the tree when it was a Pnei Haman Chafu, when Haman did not have the ability to say anything back. Says the Ben Ish Chai, even if you don't use the paper bag trick, and you don't say like the Rambam, that a Pnei Haman Chafu, he says like this. Achashverosh says, Mihu Zaviyazah. Who's the guy? Who wants to kill you? Which, by the way, the Ben Ish Chai says is a ridiculous question. What do you mean, who's the guy? Achashverosh knows better than anyone else who the guy is. The only reason he's Kinim Karnu Ani Ve'ami Lahashmil Aro. Who else? The Italians, the Russians, right? Now he knows. She never said. So the only reason he's saying that is he's playing dumb. He doesn't want to insult Esther, right? So he knows. So why didn't Haman say back to Achashverosh, Mihu Zaviyezdahu? Are you kidding me? We're in this together. All of a sudden, it's like Haman is tongue-tied. He can't open up his mouth. He forgets the most basic tainus. And then when Achashverosh comes back, and it looks like Haman is, and he says, Hagam lichboy shimi babayis? Look what you're doing. You know what Haman should have said? Doing what? I'm getting on my hands and knees. I'm begging her for my life. You think I would do this in the past? Haman doesn't say a word. All of a sudden, all the obvious response is, he's mute. He's like a goylem. He has nothing to say. I mean, time after time, he's demonstrating that for some reason, Haman lost it. He's so discombobulated. He's so confused. He doesn't know what to taina. So now Charvona says, the guy is so confused and so tongue-tied, it's a good time to bring up the tree. He's never going to say back to me, hey, you gave me the idea. He's obviously having a really bad day today. Okay, now here's the key. What's the taina of Charvona? Achashverosh obviously is not impressed by the fact that Haman wants to kill the Jews. He didn't say hang him. He's not really that impressed by the fact that Haman's about to violate Esther in front of his face. He didn't say hang him. But the fact that Haman wanted to hang Mordechai, that all of a sudden is a reason to hang Haman now. Says the Ben Ish Chai two very interesting things. It says like this. If you're second in command, and you're powerful, and you're a governor, you're official, and the king invests a lot of power in you, you could do whatever you want. You want to have your own executive account, you want to write out checks from the national fund, you could do whatever you want. One thing you can't do is set up a capital punishment center in your house. Because life and death is biyad hamelach. And if somebody would start opening up his own electrical chair in his backyard, that's rebellion. That's being married b'malchus. I mean, you don't take that. It doesn't matter how powerful you are. You don't take that into your own hands. So Charvona is bringing up the fact. He tells Achashverosh, you made this guy second in command, but look what he did. He made a tree. He wants to hang Mordechai. He doesn't like hang Mordechai. He doesn't like Mordechai. No problem. Let him shoot him. Now all of a sudden he's issuing capital punishment in his front yard. Who does he think he is? Thinks he's the king? I mean, it's fine. You invested power in him. You gave him a ring. But now he's setting up He made a tree, Gavaya. So Charvona is going to say, well, maybe the reason he did that is because he didn't want to, he knew that Mordechai is on your good side, so he didn't want to do anything publicly, so he's going to do it still a height. Still a height, it's 50 amos tall, according to Chazon Ish, it's 100 feet tall. What's he doing setting up, administering capital punishment in his backyard? That's Merida. That's Merid b'Malchus. How dare he do that? Okay, but here's the Chiddush of the Shir. Says the Ben Ish Chai, Charvona's comments could not come at a more opportune time. Had Achashverosh remembered to reward Mordechai a month ago, 2 months ago, everything would have been perfect, and we would have been dead meat. The fact that Achashverosh remembered to reward Mordechai the day after those gallows were built, that is the whole miracle of Purim. Listen carefully. So, Haman is coming into the king's palace. He wants to tell the king that he's going to hang Mordechai. And the king has other plans. The king says, what do you think should be done to someone who the king wants to honor? So Haman says, let him wear the royal clothing, and let him put on the royal crown, and let him ride the royal horse. So Achashverosh says, Maher, go do that to Mordechai. Think about the following scene. Haman is leading Mordechai through the street. Mordechai is wearing Achashverosh's crown, or maybe not the crown. And he's riding the royal horse, and he's wearing the royal clothing. And Haman's saying, look what should be done to a guy who the king wants to honor. And in the background, there's this 100-foot gallows in the air. And people say, Haman, what's that? Oh, that's the gallows I'm going to hang this guy on. So people are scratching their head. What kind of covet is this? This is what we do to someone who the king wants to honor. We ride him through the street, and then we hang him the next day. The fact that the gallows were standing there at the time that Haman was leading Mordechai through the streets made such a mockery of Achashverosh's plan to honor Mordechai, that it made him look foolish, made him look ridiculous. Yeah, Haman screamed through the streets, fortunately, I'm sorry to tell you, and I don't like this guy, but this is what we have to do to someone who the king wants to honor. And the day before, everybody's asking Haman, what's that thing you're building? 100, right? Imagine you walk out into the street. Imagine you're walking down the street, and some guy is building a gallows. So if it's 10 feet tall, maybe you don't notice it. The thing's 100 feet tall. It's 80 feet taller than any other thing in the vicinity. And everybody knows that Haman's going to hang Mordechai on it. And the next day, Haman's dragging the guy through the street. This is how we honor someone who the king... So it looks ridiculous. He's making a complete mockery. He's making Achashverosh look like an imbecile. So the taina of Charvona was, Haman wants to kill Mordechai, no problem. But that tree is still oimed. Now listen carefully to Charvona's words. He says, Gam hinei ha'etz asher asa Haman oimed. He didn't say he planted it. You want to plant a tree to hang Mordechai? No problem. But the first thing he needed to do when he was given the instructions is go down to the tree, knock it down for a day, so that Achashverosh doesn't look like he's ridiculous, and then you'll take care of him a different time. But the fact that Haman had this misstep of guiding him through the street, with that tree still standing there, that was his downfall. So you say, come on, it wasn't so noticeable. It didn't. That's why he says, Gavaya chamishim amma. Can you imagine? This reward that you were supposed to give Mordechai of Kachei Yasel Ish, the man should have taken the tree down for the day. That was the well-timed comment of Charvona. In other words, Achashverosh, I know you're not impressed that he wants to kill the Jews. And I know you're not impressed that it looks like he's trying to violate Esther. But he made a laughing stock of you by keeping that tree up. You see that tree? Gam, hinei ha'etz, asher asa Haman, oimed, gavaya chamishim amma. Now, if Haman had his wits about him, then when he came home that day to Zeresh, and he said, Zeresh, I'm home. Zeresh says, so? He said, you wouldn't believe what happened. You couldn't believe. Today I had to leave Mordechai through the streets. So Zeresh said, are you kidding me? With that tree standing there? Quick, call the company, we got to knock it down. And they would have done that. But the pasuk says, Oida medabra mimai v'sarisei hamelech higiu vayavhilu l'haviyas Haman. The moment that he came home, Seconds later, they were dragging him out to the party. He didn't have a moment to think about his crazy misstep, that he kept the tree standing. So everybody always thinks, well, what's this little incident that Achashverosh rewards Mordechai, and Mordechai has his day in the sun, and Haman has a bad day? What's that got to do with the story? The bottom line is, the next day, the Jews are still dead meat. That's the whole miracle. The miracle was that on Mordechai's day in the sun, Haman forgot to say, you know what? This is day in the sun. We'll get back to the regularly scheduled annihilation when we're finished. Let's clear things out. We'll make it look real, and then we'll get back to it after. No. That was the whole setup. The whole setup was, Balayla hahu nadada shnas hamelech. But think about the timing. The timing was, when did Achashverosh remember to reward Mordechai? If he would have remembered 2 months before, bad news for the Jews. A week ago, 2 days ago, he only remembered to reward Mordechai the day after the gallows were put up. So now Haman looks ridiculous, leading him through the streets with the gallows still standing. The miracle of the Purim story was that Balayla hahu nadada shnas hamelech. It was only on that night. Once the tree is standing, now we reward Mordechai. Now Haman looks bad. Charvona waits. He's afraid Haman's going to say, you gave me the idea. So he waits till the paper bag's over the head. He waits till Haman's a little confused. He sends out the idea, Gam hinei ha'etz. And Haman's hanging. That answers Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshit's question, why the miracle of Haman's day, of Mordechai's day in the sun was necessary, and why the Megillah needs to mention that they quickly, hastily dragged Haman out of the party before he had a chance to think and maneuver around what he did. So says the Ben Ish Chai, so really the miracle of Purim was that Achashverosh did not remember to reward Mordechai until that fateful day. What took him so long? Why did he remember then? Says Ben Ish Chai, I guess he was farshlufen, he was sleeping. Says the Ramah, if you don't like to drink, just drink a little bit, and then go to sleep. That's good enough to remember the Purim story, because it wasn't just the wine that contributed to the miracle, says the Ben Ish Chai. It was also the fact that Achashverosh was farshlufen until that day, the day after the tree was put up. Tree is put up, Mordechai is led through the streets, Haman makes Achashverosh look ridiculous, Achashverosh realizes it, Haman can't say anything, the old paper bag trick. Rabbi Isai, that's why we have a Freilich and Purim Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.